Hey Grigori. So I'm just messing about here. One of the things I was showing here was this BPM pulse. This allows us to very quickly create a tappable BPM that it'll keep sync to the world. And in this case, I just have it kind of hooked up to this node emitter. So when I hit tap, it will now, once it takes over, it starts to kind of emit at a particular beat. And so this BPM control actually controls this pulse that we can kind of assign to lots of different things. So for instance, if I just take a box, let's say, and take its transform, and I can, like, for instance, assign it to the y-axis of this transform, and now it's synchronizing to that. And we can make some copies of this, and those sync now to that beat. If we were to take, let's say, other beats, let's say we don't want to do it on every beat, we want to do it on every half beat. We can, for instance, if we want to link this to the radius of this sphere, I'm just going to add it to this. There's this option here that lets us do it on every other beat, for instance. And so now our global BPM controls kind of sync everything, but this one kind of happens at every other beat. And likewise, I can just take this here and set this to like 4 every 4th beat. So now it waits. If we resync it here. Nope, I think I selected the wrong one. Oh, that should be 4. Let's see here. Still doing it on every 4th beat, but anyways, you get the idea. These kind of things, I have to take a look at that, see what's going on there. But and so here, I just kind of was messing around with the terrain here. Not that this would have a lot to do with, well, actually for VJing, you can get some pretty cool effects here. I'm gonna play with the terrain here and turn on this specular. Get it to be kind of shiny and kind of strange looking. And likewise, these beats can control anything, including things like filters here. So let's say we create an image filter here. And let's try this thing here. We can also take the parameters of this, for instance, and link those to the beat. So now we have this kind of like flashing thing that happens on this rhythm every other beat. And we can control all sorts of like attack and release parameters. Control how fast it goes in and out of this value. We reduce the offset. How do I activate the BPM controller in the space? Oh, okay. Yeah, let me show you. So actually, the great thing is that this BPM controller actually just lives in your world, so we can actually play with it and modify it. So I'll delete it and recreate it. So I'm gonna delete it here, and if you'll see, there's these live tools category at the top, and then at the bottom there are BPM controls. And when I click, it just adds them to the space. And it also, when you do that, it also adds a BPM pulse. And then it's this pulse that you add to various animations, to various properties, that then are synced to this BPM control. And so that's how you do it. Now, because this lives in the space, we can take this and configure this however we want. This overlay thing here. We can make it bigger. We can make it smaller. We can stick it over here. We can even cut and paste this into the 3D world and put it on like a VR controller. So stuff like that is always fun. So yeah, if you don't like it, you can just go in here and edit these controls. I want my resync button to be up here, and I want my tap beat to be over here. You know, you don't have to be limited to how it's laid out here. Now they're kind of hard to see, but you get the point. So that's that. I'll move those back. So those are the BPM controls. Now, if you're doing things for VR, for instance, one of the useful things, I'm going to turn off this image filter group here. One of the useful things is if you create a camera, let's say, is you want to be able to grab this maybe in VR and move it around. And for that, we added under Live Tools this Add Grip feature. And when you do that, it creates this little movable grip. And so let's say we have this camera. Let's say we want to output this to a secondary display. And actually, what I'm going to do is create a virtual display. But you can imagine sending this camera to like your second screen that maybe goes to Resolume, or it goes to a some other display, a projector, or whatever. What we can do here is, just for demonstration purposes, I'll just have it render directly in here, and I'm just going to create a monitor. So this is actually showing what that camera is rendering, but in this space here. So now if you're in VR, I'm not so much into VR. Okay, so yeah, we'll stay out of that then. Actually, we'll create this camera again, because some of the cool things you can do with this monitor thing that I was showing is that this kind of renders whatever's in that camera in this space, and so this you can kind of do some really cool trippy effects, right? Right now it's rendering its own self here, so you get this cool Hall of Mirrors effects. But it's with this kind of trick that we can kind of filter things within things kind of thing. So you can actually access that view here in the viewport. This is the view that's rendering into that texture. And we can, like, for instance, perform filtering on this, like blur, and then we can kind of see that world is blurred here, and all sorts of things that are kind of like that. VJ subjects are better. Okay, got it. I will stick with the VJ subjects. Yeah, because VR is tricky to like link that into a live performance and stuff like that. It has its own kind of issues. So I'm glad to stick with VJ for this. So anyways, this is kind of interesting, just to do kind of trippy, interesting effects. Let's see here. Yeah, this is pretty weird. This is like overexposing. That's really bright. Let's see. Other cool things that we could quickly do here with input music. So one of the other cool things that was added recently is the ability to create an input audio stream. And so what this does is it basically says, take the input audio from whatever audio source you have. So it might be a microphone in the space. So I'll show you now my own voice here. I can sample it here for the space itself. So I'm just going to draw a simple visualizer, signal visualizer. You can just see my voice here. And so I'm going to now bind this. So you can imagine this is your music source. I'm going to bind this with a audio waveform signal. And then this audio waveform signal is going to come not from what I hear, but from a particular audio stream, which will be the input audio stream. And this is all explained in some of the tutorials and stuff that we have online, but I'm happy to go over this again. And then I can bind this input audio stream to a particular microphone, like the one I'm talking out right now. So you can now see kind of hello as I speak. And so this can now become an input for a variety of things. So let's say we want to set the sphere radius to listen in on the audio of the space. I'm going to, instead of using the BPM pulse, which is like synced to this tap thing here, I'm going to instead sync this to a audio peak pulse. And this takes as an input an audio stream, which in this case, we do this. So now, every time I speak loud, if I configure this right, so you can imagine, if there's a beat in the scene, it would synchronize that automatically to that. So using these signals, we can very quickly kind of link various things to a live audio performance as well. The other, so this is for live performance. I think, in that kind of situation, you kind of have to use these automated systems, or you'll have to tap it out yourself. If you knew that your audio is pre-baked ahead of time, you're just gonna hit play and it was gonna play audio. Then you could use this feature called a sync track, where you can lay out the exact moments on an audio stream. So let's say I import a piece of audio data here. See if I can find something here. Projects, Simmetri, Dome. There's a song in here somewhere. Here we go. So if we have this kind of situation where we have audio in a space, actually, you know what? I'm going to import this as a background music track. It's better. Then we could actually create, using the sync track that I created here, we can actually set this on the exact moments that we're interested in, and then we can, like the other signals, we can connect that to this sync track, and then things will hit exactly with the beat. So actually, we can do that right now. So just like I did here with the audio peak pulse, that was listening in the environment's audio. On this one, for instance, I will create a new synced pulse from the sync track. So now it will pulse this to the beat of this, to this song. If synced pulse, there we go. But it's kind of delayed here. This sphere is behaving kind of strangely. I'll go ahead and recreate this really quickly. So I'm going to use this radius here. Create a new pulse controller and a new synced pulse. There we go. I don't know why it was really synced. Anyways, here we can lay out exactly the beats that we would want on a particular track. This is not so much for live, but I'll get there. Yeah, sorry, I am kind of giving you a very fast kind of overview of this. And by the way, Grigori, you know, we have these interactive tutorials, which are a lot of fun, that kind of teach you the basics. And one of the things we want to build out is additional categories here. So we might do like a category for VJs that kind of teach you all these kind of things interactively. So these interactive tutorials actually kind of have you go through and do things in real time. And you know, I think the plan is definitely to include many more of these because I think they're really nice and fun to play with. And one specifically for VJs is definitely in the works, so that you could say, okay, how do I add an audio thing, and it will guide you through to doing that. So I do apologize. I know I'm going kind of fast here. I'm just kind of giving you an overlay of some of the kind of things that you can kind of quickly do with some of these built-in effects and stuff. So so yeah, so you can imagine, you know, I showed you some of the audio synchronization features and all these kind of things. The other big thing is just kind of combining all these things together, right? So for instance, let's say you want to create a button in the space here that you want to, every time you press it, maybe you have your own console that control that. So that, in other words, you could be looking at a world here, and then you could send another view, like another camera, to another display. And so then you can create your own console that, like, okay, every time I push this, something happens in the space. So you have your model or something cool that you're, and see if I can find something I can import in. Actually, I'm going to go to Google Poly here, and we'll search for like something that would be interesting for a scene here. Well, I'll just do cat here. It's like the classic. So let's say we have our, like a cool 3D object or something that, let's see here. Now we can import this in. Desktop. Okay, so imagine, you know, you have your camera kind of orbiting around this or showing this. So you could, for instance, you know, create your own little console of features here, buttons that you can push, and I can show you very quickly if I go to interactions. Like when I click on these now, they'll glow, for instance. So it shows that I clicked them. But now I can add some feature that makes them do something to the space. That, you know, maybe when I click this, let's say on press here, I can have it maybe turn out a filter. So I'm going to just create an image filter here, like this, and we'll do this. And so maybe it will turn on this image filter group automatically. So I just drag and drop that into here, and just say image filter group dot visible is equal to true. Now it's false. So now whenever I push this button here, it turns that filter on. So you can kind of create your own panels to like switch between camera angles or switch between effects and stuff like that while it's showing things in the space. And so anything in here can be automated, by the way. So right now we're in this 3D space here, but I'm actually going to copy this, and I can create a new, a blank space, for instance. So now that puts us in a nice empty kind of world here, where where we can do whatever we want. We're not in an actual physical space, so we can start to play around with a lot more things here. So for instance, I'm going to do like additive here. Maybe make this really bright. Now these things are additively added. Start to overlap these. And then maybe we'll do some large kind of like doing these kind of ideas. Well, I'm glad you reminded me. Yeah, sorry, I know I'm going kind of fast here. You know, I've been using this program for so long, haven't been working at it for so long that I've just kind of lost the ability sometimes to kind of give people a nice gradual way of kind of introducing this. And so that's why it's all about tutorials, and it's all about these kind of live things, so we can kind of show in slow motion kind of these things, because I've gotten admittedly not great at doing this. Because I'm just way too like speedy. I'm impatient. Just because I. So let's see if we can change up the colors here a little bit. Kind of weird. Yeah, I mean, it would be nicer if we like varied these colors a little bit more, and you can get really creative with these kind of ideas. But you get the idea. You can build these like blank worlds, and actually, if I hit space now, all physics is enabled. So these things are actually using physics. So you actually get a lot of these not really intentional here. So if we put like an attractor in the middle of this thing, let's see what happens here. This thing is a physics attractor. Things will slowly be attracted to that. I guess they create this weird thing. I'm going to move this attractor around. They kind of follow it. Yeah, this is a weird example. But if we have, let's say we delete these things here. Go away. Go away. This space has no gravity, for instance. So all these objects will kind of be attracted to this thing. And so you can imagine already by just animating this thing here, you can get some kind of cool effects very quickly. So if I create an emitter here, this is kind of a fun kind of physical, or we can create a physics objects for these as well. So now these things will move with that. Delete these other ones here. So I'm gonna crank up maybe this thing has a funny rotation. I'm going to center this thing's mass, line pivot, center. We'll crank up the number of things that are being emitted here. Maybe a little less. More of these. And maybe we want to vary each one of these things that come out, each one of these spheres. So we can do that by clicking on the sphere and adding clone variants, normal distributions. So now we start getting some variants here, which is kind of interesting. A 3D goggle unit. Ooh, cool. Yeah. If you do that, definitely give it a whirl. And again, the tutorial will show you kind of how to set that up as well. And one other thing you could consider doing, which is kind of a little corny, but could be kind of interesting, is you can do like stereoscopic 3D. This is like the old school 3D glasses. If you gave everybody, for those really cheap glasses, you can get like 3D effects this way. The red, blue glasses, that whole thing. So it's just another idea. Yeah, so hopefully the frame rate's pretty good. Right now this is running in an editor, so this is another important thing to show you, Grigori. This is running inside an editor, so the editor is a little bit more taxing because it has to store and do information, stuff like that. The idea is when you build your sets, and this includes for cameras and things like that, if you have other outputs and stuff, and I'll show you what I mean by this. I'm going to create an additional display for this. Let's say I have my set done, and I think, oh, this is kind of neat. This is what I want people, my audience, to see, including this different camera angle here. I can now take this and export this as an application, so it runs outside of Simmetri, so you don't have to worry about, let me call this test app. So now I'm going to save this and close this. Now I can just launch this as its own app, basically, so it's much more lightweight. And now I hit play, and I have just the application, outside of the editor. So you can build all your sets and export them as these external applications. But now, remember, I had set up a different camera angle that maybe I want to send to a different display, and you can configure that all inside here, inside this app. So let's say I had, an NDI output that I want to send that other camera angle to. Maybe have a different camera angle. You can kind of set this all up inside this exported app. So you're outside the editor now. You don't have to worry about all that stuff, and yet you can, and it runs at a much higher performance too. And so, for instance, I'm going to go back into the show, into the editor here. For instance, we had the BPM thing, for instance. So let's bring that into the open space here, and I'll show you how that works. I'm going to create the BPM controls for this space, and so they live here. And again, let's say we sync this BPM. Maybe we'll sync the BPM, so every time I hit the BPM, these emit spheres. So instead of having it continuously emit, I'm going to hit none for that, and instead I'm going to use that BPM pulse. So now every single time I tap, it's going to emit. Now it emits at the beat these spheres. So now, let's say I exported this application. I'd say, okay, I'm going to export this as, I'm going to call this test app 2. And I'm going to save this. Now I can go into Test App 2, crack this open, and my BPM controls are there. And now as I tap, they come out. So it's all kind of nicely packaged, and so now you don't have to have all that other complexity. The other cool thing is, I'm going to just jump back into the editor, load up the show, is that, let's say I have a VJ friend that I want to share this with really quickly. You can just go to File, Share on Steam, and I can just push this really quickly onto Steam. So I can say, okay, you can also just share this with your friends, but you hit Publish, and then it gets uploaded. And now your friend could, if they have Simmetri, they could just crack this open really quickly and start using it, or export it as an application, or do whatever they want. And so it's a quick way of exchanging things. You can hit share, and you take this link and you send it to your friend, and then they can then open that link and then subscribe to it. And then, much like these built-in experiences, they can subscribe and then open it from there. So that's another cool way. Yes, it can. So Spout NDI. Let me show you how that works. Let's say you have a camera and you want to send this content to a different display. If you go to Edit Preferences, and this applies in that little application that you export as well, they have the same exact user interface for setting this up. So this thing would also apply. Edit Preferences, it's the same exact way to do it in both cases, in the editor and the application. You go Edit Preferences, and then you find the camera, in this case, that you want to output. So this is that camera here, and you hit this plus button here, and you can select Spout and NDI, and there it goes, and it's already sending it out through NDI if you had a device that was set up. And likewise, Spout, and if we have another, in fact, I think I have Resolume on here, so I can show you right away how it works. So in Resolume, if we type in a source here, see it says Coco. It's already getting Spout servers, open camera viewport display. So there it is. And if I click on that, you can see it's coming into Resolume. So we're good to go there. So if I hit play on this, we'll start to see that camera angle as I tap this out here. Let me do a really fast BPM. And it's coming in through there. So in this case, it's this camera angle here that I can maybe do a top-down view here, and there we go. So it's pretty quick. So if you have another camera angle, let's say, we can bind that under another Spout output. So the camera angle I'm currently looking through is on the master display. I can also do a Spout for that, and then that would show up here as a master display. And now we can blend between these two views in this case. Or maybe your view lives in a completely different space, like it lives in this space instead, and so voila. So we're now blending between those two views, the open space and then this 3D space here. So it's a cool way to compose things as well. And we can enable depth of field here and make it look a little bit nicer. Focal distance, there we go. Maybe we'll do that image filter again. So yeah, we go back in here and we can see that those two worlds are being composed together. And so this applies for NDI as well. Cool. Yeah, I'm glad that this is speaking to you, because it was made, it was really made for you guys. It was made for VJs, and a lot of this kind of stuff. So I'm glad to see that this speaks to you very well. So yeah, so these are just some of the things. And remember, you have this whole world builder. Is really what it's all about. So all the parameters that you see, any properties that you see here, it can be automated and hooked up to parameters and all that kind of stuff. And so everything from like physics properties, mass, you can very quickly kind of link things up to beats and all that kind of stuff. So it's really all about discovering kind of cool things, and again, if you have VR too, you can kind of see how that might work. It's kind of an unexplored territory, I think, for a large part, a lot of this stuff. So it's up to you guys to kind of figure that out, what works and what doesn't. Is the export is only available where it is for now. Again, one of the things we're kind of looking at is other platforms. What other platform are you thinking? Mac, or are you thinking the web? Could you show me how to assign things in timeline for more detailed control? Sure thing. I'm going to just do File New. Let's clear this out. There's lots of different ways you can do on the timeline. A lot of different things we can do. So I think I showed you before, Mac or the web. Got it. I showed you before we can kind of import music and kind of have it on here, but if you're doing live, that's less useful. For instance, this is a very straightforward thing to do. Let's say I want to keyframe this. I'm going to go to its transform. I'm going to create a new key track, and then it has a track here, and then we can double click to insert track events, and then move the time forward, move it somewhere else, double click to insert a new event, and now I can then right click between the space here and select an interpolator. Let's do bounce, ease in, out, and so now it kind of will interpolate between those two. So that's an example of a simple thing to do kind of animations on a timeline. Another thing you can do is create a new unit in timeline, and this creates like a bundled chunk of space. It's more, not so much. Oh, okay, yeah. So let's take a look at an audio track then. So let's import an audio track, and let's import this thing. Beat Your Competition, Future City Funk. It's actually, I like this song. This is actually from YouTube, the free YouTube library, so there's a lot of good stuff in there. I hope you can hear this. I think you can. Yeah, you can. So here's an example. So let's say we want to create, so there are lots of different ways you can do animation. So one thing is the sync track. So the sync track is like basically saying, I have some events in this audio that I find interesting, like beats is your common case, but not necessarily. You can create additional sync tracks if there are other things that you'd want to sync. Let's say this music has some other like emotion that you want to convey or whatever. You can kind of like flag them using these sync tracks. And what that means is that now we can quickly animate things off the sync track. So I always use this example of the sphere here. I set the radius to match the sync track. It's just very easy to see. I create a new signal controller, or a pulse controller, sorry. And then on here, I'm going to create a new synced pulse from sync track 1 or sync track 2. Sync track 1 was the first one. And then it starts to kind of beat at that rhythm. So that's one way to sync things to music. Another thing is just straight keyframing. So let's say I have like let's say I have an object that we import or whatever, and I have a property that I want to animate to that. So like the transform was how I was showing it before. I create a new key track. It appears here. And then I can just insert a keyframe for the current position, move this into the future, and then move this somewhere else. Insert a key track there. It will now jump between them, so I have to select an interpolator. So I just right-click and select like quadratic ease in, and then there we go. So we can kind of synchronize things on the audio track that way. So that's another way to think of animations. Another really useful one, another track that's really useful is the script track. So this is if you want to call script at some point in time. And so sometimes there are things that are just easier to do in script. I'm not sure how familiar you are with code and stuff like that. If you are, that's great, and I think you can kind of quickly figure out your way around. If you're not, that's okay too. I think what we're definitely gearing up to support people that are less familiar with script and teaching them how to do it, because you can actually do a lot with very little. For instance, let's say I have an object. Let's say I want to switch camera angles using script. And so right now we're looking through the world through this default camera using this terrain space here, and let's say I have another camera angle that's over here, and I want to switch to this programmatically. So at a point, okay, good. So you're okay with code. So then you'll definitely pick this up right away then. But let me show you how this would work then. So let's say I'm currently looking through this viewport here, and I want to basically switch it to this viewport. This viewport was created automatically when I created that camera. So I basically want to toggle between these two viewports, and we want to do that in code. So how do we do that? We just so I double-clicked on this event to create this script track, this blank script track. And now, so what we're actually controlling when we switch viewports here is we're controlling on the master. There's a master display here, and it's here the active viewport is where that's being set. So when I switch, if I pin this down here. When I switch, you'll see that it's switching this active viewport. That's actually what's going on when I click that. So we just need to set this programmatically, basically. And we can do that just by taking the master display, just drag and dropping it into here, and then just simply saying active viewport is equal to, and then in this case, we want it to be equal to camera viewport. So I just drag and drop that into here, and then it's equal to camera viewport. And so now when I hit play, when it reaches this script here, it will set the viewport to the camera viewport automatically. There we go. And you can also do transitions. So if you look in the master display, you'll see that it has visual transitions as well. So we can do like a crossfade. And then we can specify how long that crossfade is. And so now when we switch camera angles, it'll just do it for crossfade. There we go. It's a little bit nicer. So there are other ways to change camera angles. You could also, instead of creating a script track, I'm going to disable this script track. You can also keyframe this property. So instead, at the master display, this active viewport, I can just say new key track. And then I can literally just drag and drop these into the key track as well, as another way of doing animations for switching camera angles. So I think that's the same as the first one, this is the second one. So now I can maybe switch back to this, and then I'm going to hold these two down, hold down Alt. So now they're going to keep switching camera angles every couple of seconds, or every split second. So there's another example. Yeah, exactly. Building a library of scripts is a good way to do it. In fact, since you're already privy with how scripting works, a good way, what I find a good way to organize my state is to actually create scripts that live in the universe. This is like at your root node. You can create these global scripts. So if you create you can create a new global script. And so now you can create your kind of centralized script in here. So I show a little example here, but imagine this is storing some state for your world. I don't know what it might be. Yeah, add to score is fine. I'm actually going to close Resolum because I can tell it's eating up some cycles here. So let's say you have this global script and you want to access that, for instance, from this script here that we created before that was changing camera angles. We can do that very easily. If I just drag and drop this global script into here, I can now call functions on that global script. So add to score, I believe was what I have there as a function. Add to score, yeah. So let's say we have this print to string the score. This, whatever I pass into this will just get printed to the screen. So now I just dragged and dropped this global script that I created in the universe into this on event script, which is this green thing here. And I'm just going to call a function that we create. We can create however many functions we want, and then it's going to print out basically this number. We'll have it print out 10. So we hit play, and when it reaches that point, it prints out the number 10. This is more for debugging purposes, but if you're comfortable with scripts, I would definitely encourage you to kind of organize it this way, like have a universe of centralized scripts to do lots your centralized, like your director script, so to speak, that might like control overall states would occur in here. And then you can, of course, attach script onto any individual objects, like you know, the ability to, when I click this, have it do something. You know, you can do that by adding this interactable here, and then say on press or on hover. For instance, on hover, we can have it like do something like on hover self get mesh, or actually get the rigid body. This is the physics object. Apply a central impulse. Just going to apply an impulse in the center of this object. 0, 1, 0. So every time I hover the mouse over this thing, it's going to like pop upwards. Oh, but it has a keyframe on it, so I'm just going to turn off that keyframe. So I'm going to go in here, turn that keyframe off, and that's not change camera angles. Is that not? It's hovering on. Oh, it doesn't have a rigid body. Its rigid body is false. A lot of little things here. It was set to not movable, because when we keyframe it, it turns this property off so that it can so it can't be it won't be controlled by physics. So the problem is if you have physics and you're trying to keyframe its transform, they fight each other. So it sets movable to false, which means it'll only collide but it won't move. So I just had to return that back on. So back to the code that happens when we hover over it. It adds an impulse. It's a bit too strong, so I'm going to make it a little bit weaker. Now every time we hover the mouse over it, it does that, which is kind of fun. We can kind of keep it up in the air here. But anyways, probably not so useful for DJing, but it's just another way of connecting stuff around. Yeah, I agree. We haven't done a great job advertising a lot of this. It is such a challenge, Grigori, to kind of like convey all the stuff that this product can do. I'm glad that you're picking up on having done this live set. Yes, it will be available. I will definitely share it. I appreciate that. It is so hard to convey all the features of this tool, because you can look at it as a game editor, and at which point you're immediately evoked to like Unity and these kind of things. But it's different. It's a different type of sandbox, and I think trying to get that across is very hard because there's so much here, and every artist is different. Everybody wants to do their own thing and stuff, so it's hard to also make a product that necessarily speaks to everybody right away. You know, so it's all about learning it. So yeah, super appreciate that you're picking up on all this and what it's possible, what its capabilities are, because. You know, we certainly built it for everybody, and we built this thing for creativity, and so that's cool. Yeah, so I'm going to connect with you back in the chat room here. So if you are sharing this, let me see here. Okay. Okay. So how to bring two channels from external sources? Spout. Yes. So you're right. I did not show you how to bring in sources. I only showed you how to export sources. So let me see if I can have Resolume output its content. So I'm going to just have a source here. Let's just do a checkered source just so we can see it do something here, and so it'll be outputting this. Output, we're going to enable texture sharing spout and network stream, so it's already turned on. So watch. Line sources and move them. Okay, yeah, so let's imagine Resolume is now outputting, but you can use whatever program, NDI or whatever, that would be outputting. So now what we're going to do is we're going to create a new input texture, and it's called an input 2D texture. And this is now already receiving that signal from Resolume. And so if I just dragged it in, we already have it coming in. So this is now whatever Resolume is. So if we also add this, so there we go. And so so that would be one way. So if you have multiple outputs, you can kind of mix them together. I'm just going to, for instance, we can add this. We can add a rigid body to this thing. So now it will physics here. Copies of this. Maybe we can emit this. So this is just a texture, by the way. So we can apply this texture however we want in a variety of ways. So for instance, I can create a light source, a spotlight, and I can project this texture using a spotlight. So I'm going to take this and I'm just going to drag and drop that into here. So now it's projecting that onto the ground. So I'm going to set the color of the light to black, so it's totally dark, and so that all we can see is the light of the. So this will now project Resolume's contents via that. So that's kind of cool. So if we go into the darkness here, I'm going to go to nighttime. By the way, we can switch to different, like on the horizon here, we can switch to different. Like we can go on the moon here. Now we're on the moon here. We can see the planet in the background, the Earth. So this is actually projecting Resolume's outputs using this this projector instead. But you can see that anything that requires a texture. So if we have a sphere and we have a material on this sphere, and we create a new material. On this material, we can set like the translucency map or the diffuse map. We'll just do the diffuse map to be that input texture. Oops, the texture here. And so now, if we apply this material to this sphere here, now it's also part of that as well. So there you go. So that's one. You can project them. You can, maybe we want to create a 2D layer here. So I'm going to create a screen layer, and I'm going to take that texture, which I think lives in here, and now it's on the 2D screen. And you can imagine blending things together this way as well. Yeah, you have to learn the secret sauce. Once you learn all the little nuances and stuff, you can start having your own like special spices of tricks. I have a lot of like little tricks that I use, but I'm sure there's so many to be discovered that I think it's always fun when you combine them. So I hope that answers the question of how to work with inputs. So of course, you can have multiple inputs here. Let's say we had, I think in fact we can have this. Oh, let me show you how to actually bind those inputs. So in this case, it was auto bound because it listens in and saw that there was something there. But let's say you had multiple inputs. You set those just like we do with the outputs. You go into Edit Preferences, and you set them in your inputs, and you'll see input textures, and here are the two textures, and then you use set here, and you can choose your input. So in this case, Resolume does avenue composition via spout or NDI, so there's just two outputs. And again, when you export this as an application, you have access to this preferences there as well to bind things in the application itself. And so just like Resolume can come in this way, audio can also come in this way, as I showed you in the beginning, via this input audio stream, and so. Again, in Edit Preferences, input textures are bound here, and input audio streams are bound here. So you can set your microphone or your various inputs. That's how inputs come in. So yeah, hopefully that gives you a little bit of a kind of export things too. That's super useful to build your sets. And the export, unlike the editor is single instance. You can only run it with one instance, but those exported exes, you can run multiple instances at once, and so when you minimize it and stuff, you can blend things together that way as well. So you can that works too. So I'm gonna close this off, and I will continue in the chat room if you have any other questions.